The 1960s were a game-changing decade no matter how you look at it. In terms of culture, there was rock music, pop art, and unforgettable films like The Sound of Music. In terms of civil rights, there was the success of desegregation as well as the tragic death of Martin Luther King Jr. In terms of science, there was the monumental moon landing of 1969. Those events are only the tip of the iceberg. It would be impossible to try and put all the noteworthy events from that 10-year period into a single post. Instead, we focused on moments that are a mix of big historical events, like the passing of RFK and the rise of Beatlemania, with smaller daily events, like drinking Tang and riding banana bikes. Let's take a look. The TV show American Bandstand began back in 1956, was massively popular in the 1960s and continued being well-watched until its final episode in 1989. For that entire 4-decade run, Clark, known as America's oldest teenager, hosted the show. The music and dance show introduced millions of kids and adults to musical acts like Smokey Robinson, Sonny and Cher, Stevie Wonder, and more. It also taught them how to dance everything from the locomotion to the mashed potato. In the late 1950s, March of 1959 to be exact, the Barbie doll was unleashed onto the consumer market. It picked up steam and then exploded in popularity during the 1960s. In 1961, Barbie's boyfriend Ken was added to the mix. Kids everywhere, mostly girls, bought them in droves. Nearly 60 years later, the craze hasn't finished. Over 1 billion dolls have been sold in total. Nowadays, Barbie dolls have expanded beyond the original designs to include different body sizes and ethnicities. The 1960 Summer Olympics were held in Rome, Italy, and featured 17 different sports. When it came to boxing, 18-year-old Cassius Clay won the gold medal for light heavyweight boxing. 4 years later, Cassius Clay changed his name to Muhammad Ali and became one of the greatest boxers and athletes ever known. After a few years of legal troubles caused by refusing to be drafted into the Vietnam War, he came back into the ring in the fight of the century against Joe Frazier in 1971. Toward the end of 1960, the animated sitcom The Flintstones first premiered. It introduced audiences to the Flintstones, Fred, Wilma, and their 2 kids, the Rubbles, Barney, Betty, and their son, and a whole host of other characters. For the next 6 years, adoring audiences regularly tuned in to watch the antics of this prehistory animated family. Alongside the fame of the show itself, its success can also be measured by the impact it had on other cartoons, theme parks, and merchandise. The original I Love Lucy sitcom was composed of 180 episodes that ran from 1951 to 1957. During that time, it was one of the most popular TV shows to hit the American market. People loved Lucy, played by Lucille Ball, and Ricky Ricardo, played by Desi Arnaz. TV audiences loved the duo so much that a new show, The Lucille Ball, Desi Arnaz Show, had a special 3-season run from 1957 to 1960. The show really ended after that but has been loved ever since. When the Etch-a-Sketch debuted at a German toy fair in 1959, it was a flop. By the next year, however, it was a hit. That's because the Ohio Art Company bought the magic screen from its French inventor, rebranded it Etch-a-Sketch, and sold it on the American market. That first year saw nearly 600,000 units sold as it quickly became one of the most popular toys of the boomer generation. It was the perfect, artistic, cure for boredom. The singer-songwriter Bob Dylan, called the voice of his generation, a title he was uncomfortable with, released the self-titled Bob Dylan album in 1962. Although it didn't bring him overnight success, it was a respectable first album with blues, gospel, folk covers, and originals. Dylan's success grew as the decade continued. His protest songs were played during the civil rights movements of the 60s, and he gained a massive audience. That audience has continued to grow over the decades. Station wagons have been around since the early 1900s, basically since the invention of cars themselves. All the big players, Chrysler, Ford, AMC, Dodge, produced their own versions. The height of their popularity came in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s. Countless kids growing up in the 60s have fond memories of piling into the family station wagon for a trip to the beach or to visit relatives. They were perfect for drive-in movies too, because the back was big enough to sprawl out in. Sesame Street just seems like one of those shows that have been around forever. However, that's not the case. On November 10, 1969, it made its debut. Although it had some controversy, most TV audiences immediately took to Big Bird, Oscar the Grouch, the Cookie Monster, and others. Over 50 years later, the show has racked up nearly 5,000 episodes, won countless awards, and been broadcasted in over 140 countries. Countless millions of kids know the characters and storylines. Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., shown at the Lincoln Memorial below, was an influential civil rights leader during the 1950s and 1960s. During that time, he withstood a lot of verbal and physical abuse alongside multiple arrests. However, the civil rights cause gained significant momentum. During the historic March on Washington, King spoke to a crowd of roughly 250,000 people and gave what many consider to be one of the greatest speeches of all time, the "I Have a Dream" speech. The Beatles began their music career in Liverpool in 1960. They had some fame in the UK and Europe during the early 1960s, but it wasn't until their first US visit that their fame really exploded. That's in large part due to a very famous TV appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show. The 5 songs they played were an immediate hit with 73 million people who watched the show that night. Ringo Starr, George Harrison, John Lennon, and Paul McCartney became huge. Tang, as you can see below, doesn't look that appetizing. Yet despite appearances, the powdered drink was a huge hit in the 1960s. A big part of that was due to its use by John Glenn during his 1962 Mercury spaceflight. Subsequent NASA flights used the powdered drink as well. However, many astronauts, like the second man on the moon Buzz Aldrin, are not fans of the overly sweet beverage. Regardless, 1960s kids loved it and it continues to be popular all over the world. A beehive isn't just the place where bees make all their honey. It was also an incredibly popular hairstyle from the 1960s. First created and debuted by hairstylist Margaret Vinci Helt in 1960, it quickly caught on and was popular throughout the decade. The Ronettes, a popular girl group at the time, played an important role in popularizing the beehive hairdo. Many decades later, the singer Amy Winehouse revamped the signature hairdo and made it popular again among modern audiences. In 1961, baseball had a huge year. The right fielder Roger Maris and center fielder Mickey Mantle, both of the New York Yankees, were competing to break Babe Ruth's legendary home run record. It was Maris who eventually did it on October 1, 1961. Maris and the New York Yankees were playing against the Boston Red Sox. In the regular season's last game, Maris hit his 61st home run, beating Ruth's record of 60. It was a historic moment that had Maris and the fans cheering. The first televised presidential debate came in 1960, more specifically on September 26 of 1960. It was between Senator John F. Kennedy, for the Democrats, and Vice President Richard Nixon, for the Republicans. Those who chose to listen to it on the radio thought that both contestants performed equally well. However, the television audience had a marked preference for the younger, more handsome, and more charismatic John F. Kennedy. He won the debates, was elected president and took office in early 1961. Bikes have been loved ever since they came out in the late 19th century. That being said, they became extra loved in the 1960s when Schwinn came out with the banana bike. The high-rise handlebars and large padded seat made it look like a motorcycle. Kids loved the look, comfort, and convenience of it. As you can see from above, it allowed 2 people to easily ride at once. Many boomers have fond memories of wheeling around with siblings or friends. In 1966, singer Nancy Sinatra released the song "These Boots Are Made for Walkin'." The boots that were made for walkin' in the music video were go-go boots. Contrary to most boots that stayed around the ankles, the go-go boots came up right below the knee. Although the boots had already been on the market since 1964, Sinatra's hit song certainly boosted their popularity. The signature white boots were soon on every girl's wish list and were a big part of 1960s fashion. Some kids enjoy having others cook and bake for them, but others enjoy doing the cooking and baking for themselves. Those industrious kids were the perfect demographic for the Easy Bake Oven. First released by Kenner Products in 1963, the Easy Bake Oven allowed budding chefs to whip up cakes, cookies, and other baked goods. Over 500,000 were sold in the first year, and that number has continued to rise over the years. In 1997, more than 16 million were sold. In the late 1950s, a Danish woodworker named Thomas Dam created the first troll dolls. Unable to buy his daughter a Christmas doll, he decided to carve one instead, hoping it would bring good luck along with holiday cheer. When they crossed the pond and hit the American market in the early 1960s, they were a huge hit. The tangled mops of unruly hair, as Life magazine described it, was simply irresistible to kids. Over the years, however, trolls lost their popularity.